Welcome to the Staying Free podcast. This podcast seeks to give a voice to real people around the world who are attempting to stay free, stay sovereign, and stay sane in a world which is changing faster than ever. In this episode, I talked to Aldous Nous. Aldous goes by a pseudonym, which I totally respect because I think that anonymity is really important in these times. He has some experience in the pharmaceutical industry as well, so he is an interesting person to talk to about this. But more so than that, Aldous has a lot of important insights, and he obviously thinks from first principles, which is something that I gathered from reading his tweets on Twitter as well. So I think that this conversation is something that a lot of people will connect with. I do have to apologise again that the conversation is coming quite late. You'll notice that we discuss vaccine passports being a thing in the UK. That has since been revoked. So this is dated by around about 2 months. We recorded the conversation towards the end of December. I am trying to close that gap, and future episodes should be released much closer to the time that they're actually recorded. But that said, I don't think it takes away from the conversation. I hope you enjoy it. If you have any feedback, reach out to me on Twitter. Aldous, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Johnny. I'm delighted to be here. Very excited.
Yeah, before we go too much into this, where did the name Aldous Nous come from?
Oh, I think it was just ties in with the handle I had there about Brave New Orwell. So some of the most inspiring literature I grew up with was Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, and some of the works of George Orwell, particularly around 1984, which is very relevant for today. And as I was coming up with the name, Aldous was going to be in there somewhere, Orwell was going to be in somewhere. It just kind of fell out of that.
Nice, yeah. I like the fact that you've kind of gone down the anonymity road there.
And if you look at the avatar, you look at the picture as well. It's also a face merge of the two guys as well. So that's actually George Orwell.
Oh, is it? Oh, I didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't notice that. Oh, that's cool. So, how did you kind of find yourself? Just to kind of give a brief intro of how I know you, as is quite common with these with my podcast guests. It's through Twitter. So you've been putting some really good takes out there, and I wanted to come and have a chat. So, how did you find yourself entangled in this whole kind of freedom movement?
I think it was probably about somewhere around this time last year, and throughout the summer last year, just increasingly felt uncomfortable with the way things were developing. It didn't feel like we were being led in an honest way. I was very skeptical about the pandemic. 1 minute we're all going to die, and the next minute we're eating out to help out. It just flip-flopped. And then I don't really use social media. I have no other social media accounts. So I was reading Twitter through the back end of the summer. And then as it was announced we were going into lockdown again, which was around about the 5th of November, that's when I personally thought rather than just reading the conversation, I felt like I wanted to be more a part of the conversation. So actually my first ever social media account was this one, and it was started 5th of November as we went into lockdown for the second time last year.
Right, okay. And so obviously since you've got this name, which is based upon Orwell, presumably before this period you were already interested in kind of dystopian literature and other things. So,
or prophecies, as we now call them. Yeah.
Absolutely. And how does it compare then where we are now to kind of the things that you've been reading?
Well, I think it's just growing up with it and sort of touching on some of these books. And you look at Aldous Huxley and Brave New World. It was always about a society that was designed and a society that was engineered, where everybody's position and role in society was predetermined. You were given a role, a function, and you were led to that role. At the same time, it was just rampant consumerism. It was really sort of a mindless, empty life where you just fulfill a role. And there's elements of that in today's society. But I suppose what's really blown up is the whole kind of totalitarian worldview of something like 1984, where you have a one-party state, you have the big brother, the censorship, you have the destruction of history. We live in a constant now. Your life is just one big lie. And it's just funny how those two narratives sort of come together in a strange way. And, I preferred it as fiction, if I'm honest. But it seems to be that we're moving towards this new world, this new world order, and this new reality. There are elements now that are coming out of the pages and coming into real life. And I think that's where my thinking, that's where some of my context came from. That's where some of my history and thinking came from. But we're now seeing it. It's really starting to happen. And I think it's at an alarming rate as well. And pretty much not so much the brave new world side of things, though that is definitely will become, I think, more of a feature in the future. But certainly where we are now in terms of a one-party totalitarian state with one version of the truth and one narrative where people are penalised and marginalised for not going along with the party, we seem to be moving in that direction.
I'm interested to know what your political beliefs, like where do you kind of position yourself politically? Would you consider yourself to be a libertarian or a centrist, or are you not kind of too strong either way?
Yeah, certainly when it comes to party politics, I've never really got heavily involved. I think throughout my life earlier, I probably voted more Liberal, Liberal Party in the UK and a bit of Labour. I think I voted Tory once in my life, and I've stopped voting probably the last 2 or 3 elections. I'm very disillusioned with the process. So I would say party politics, no strong conviction at all. I'm very, very sceptical of party politics. As a person, as a set of values, very much around, I would say, a libertarian and freedom. I think our ability to choose our life and having the opportunity to do that is very, very important to me. So probably around that sort of libertarian set of values. But even that, as a name and as a reference point, comes with challenges because people will view it differently and attach different meanings to the word libertarian.
Yeah. I mean, in this kind of recent period, it's become quite evident to me that we used to kind of live in a situation with each other where even though we had different political beliefs, as you were saying, you could be kind of conservative and you might vote Labour or whatever it is. Maybe you go Lib Dem here and there. But it was like you could always kind of just get by with whatever the party in power was. Might not be your ideal, but you had your basic freedoms respected to some degree. I know that that's kind of a bit of a strong statement, and people who are very strong on the libertarian side, including myself, would maybe even disagree with that. But relative to where we are right now, it was kind of possible to kind of live amongst your neighbours who voted differently for you. Would you agree that right now that it seems impossible? It's kind of like our political differences have really bubbled to the surface in a way that is impossible to kind of reconcile. In a sense, it's kind of like we have crossed this kind of Rubicon now into a situation where one group of people is attempting to take the rights of another group of people, and that has kind of become something that's a bit of an impasse, really.
Absolutely. I think part of the reason I never felt that political is I never saw too much risk or danger in politics. They could occasionally tweak some things. They might raise taxes, they might invest certain things differently. But really, in terms of damage limitation, they couldn't have much of they might have an impact on your intellect, might trigger you or make you angry or make you believe in certain things, but not really much of an impact in terms of your day-to-day life. Whereas what we're seeing now, how this is manifesting, we're seeing fundamental differences in the way we live our lives because of a political process. We're seeing things mandated. We're having rights removed. This is very real. This is not a political argument in a pub over what you think about Jeremy Corbyn versus, someone else like Keir. This isn't a political debate anymore. This is a very, very real situation that's having real consequences. And party politics, for me at the moment, doesn't exist. The political process that has been around since all days, it seems to be broken. It feels like more of a functional dictatorship, right? We have a small cabal of people, institution scientists, who are just making up policy or making decisions on behalf. And the irony is that the government as it currently exists is actually, or a conservative government, is actually being propped up by a Labour opposition. In a true political environment, and the one I would recognise, someone like Keir Starmer had the ability last week to destroy Boris Johnson's career. he could have brought down, if not a prime minister, or certainly a major part of the government, if he'd sided with some Tory rebels. They could have got rid of, they would have not voted for vaccine passports. They would have broken down this narrative. He had his balls in his hand, really. And he could have ended Boris Johnson's career. Now, I don't think of any other time in history where, supposedly political opponents would just give their opposition a free card, and not only a free card, but actually support them. And that was a bit of I'm still struggling to process that, in the sense that why didn't he just stop it? Even if he didn't believe in the policy, the political benefit, the political capital of bringing down your political opposition surely would have been too hard to resist.
Yeah, completely. I mean, you could compare this to sport, and you can imagine, like, if someone, is on the opponent's goal line and has the ball and they decide to miss, and it's very obvious that they've just missed, the winning goal.
Johnny, he didn't even, it's not like he swung and he missed. He didn't even swing his leg. He was 2 yards out, goalkeeper's flat on his back. Rather than side foot it in the net, he turned his back and walked away. He didn't do anything. He didn't take a swing.
And this is the thing: if that happened in sport, you would say, okay, who's bought this guy? Who's this guy working for, right? Like, this is not someone who is playing for their own team. And I think this has been evident to a lot of people now, which is just how much of a farce politics actually is. I mean, you were saying that you've not voted in the past 3 elections.
It's theatre.
It sounds like you were actually kind of on the leading edge of that, because I actually think that next election, they are going to have such a terrible turnout. I mean, unless there is a serious party standing against, kind of vaccine passports and stuff, which is probably the only thing that's going to get people like me to the voting box. I certainly won't be voting for any of the major parties. And even if one of the major parties was going on that platform, if it was Labour or Conservatives, I just wouldn't believe it. I fundamentally wouldn't believe them.
Well, manifestos are meaningless. I mean, everything that's happening now, nobody voted, well, maybe a small percentage of people did, but nobody voted for this. And I don't just mean vaccine passports. I mean the whole kind of green COP26 type policies, where we're seeing other, threats of restrictions around travel, heating, fuel, all of these things. We seem to be living in these political policies have not been born out of a manifesto, haven't been voted on. They've come from somewhere else. So any politician that stands up now and makes a commitment to you, what are you going to believe? Well, you're just not going to believe them. They have no accountability to what, like, you could argue they very rarely have, but they seem to have zero accountability now to what they promise. They can do anything. And there's no opposition to stand in the way.
Right. And famously, Boris Johnson said that if anyone asked him to show his ID card, he would eat it in front of them. That was something he said. He was such a supposedly staunch libertarian. So it's almost like you had the one person who, if you could pick any politician and say, who's going to be the one person who would stand against this stuff, you'd pick him. The fact that Boris has gone down this line clearly shows that power resides in other areas. It does not reside amongst our politicians. There is kind of shadow power that exists, and there's many, places where you could ascribe that to. But it's very clear that our politicians are completely useless. There is an agenda that's bigger than what anyone can possibly vote for.
Same in Wales, same in Scotland, same in, you look at the mayors and the mayor of London, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and the real concern is it's not a conspiracy theory to think of it like there's a hidden hand, that there's something else that is coordinating behind the scenes these supposedly different political aims and political parties. But, it's what can you do about it? And you talk about who would you vote for next time? Why would there even be an election? If a political process is broken now, you think of where this country's come in 2 years. We've gone from laughing at the idea of being, vaccine passports, it's all a crazy conspiracy theory, to probably in the next few weeks having to show an app with your personal ID to probably get in a bar, to be frank. That seems to be the way it's going. If we've got to that in 2 years, why do you think in 2 years?
It already is there, though.
Well, it's there now for big events, and it'll probably be for small events. And
it's there for pubs as well.
Right, is it?
Yeah, it happened to me on the day before the protest. It literally happened. I got rejected from a bar.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, because I didn't have my my NHS app or a test. Like I couldn't show proof of vaccination or a test. It's already come in because I was on the same page as you. I actually thought this stuff was coming in January, but it came in like instantly after the vote.
Yeah. I've not seen it. I mean, I don't have the app and I've not been anywhere. I just won't go anywhere anyway. But
yeah, unless this business was going rogue and doing it, I haven't even bothered to check because to me I just don't care, and I try to just protect my own sanity by not keeping up with what the latest rules are. I'm just like I just live my life and I cross the bridge when I come to it. But I did have to cross that bridge, so unless that business was just going above and beyond in being fascist, then I think it's already in.
So if we've travelled this far in 2 years. And you pause and think, well, what it would look like in 2 to 3 years' time? Why would we have an election? Why would an election look even anything remotely like it looks today? What would be the restrictions on who can vote? Why wouldn't you link a COVID pass to your ability to vote? And then that will be tracked and traced as well. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things in there that if this political process it's certainly in perilous state at the moment. Why would it continue? Would there not be a plan for that? That's one of the things that vexes me.
Well, yeah, that's a good point actually, because I know in the I don't know if it's the European Parliament or something like that, they have to have a vaccine pass to go in, which essentially means that anyone who's against all of this craziness isn't even going to be able to partake in the political system because they're immediately kind of vetted out. And you're right, like there's as far as I'm concerned, if they're banning you from going into public places without a vaccine passport, the only people who will be able to vote in the next election will be people who've taken the vaccine, and they are going to be far more likely to be on board, especially if we're by that point kind of 2 years into this. They're going to be about like 12 boosters deep at that time. So they're probably just going to be like well on the road, just be like, okay, cool, I'll just do the next one. You're basically only opening up the political process to the most compliant people in society, and anyone who is in any way a kind of contrarian to the agenda will just be banned from that process.
Indeed. Well, you see not even the political process, just employment now. We've seen it already with care workers. Health workers in the NHS are facing a mandate in April where if you do not comply, you do not sign up to the vaccine narrative, you're going to lose the job. So, we know there's a health crisis developing right now. There's a mental health crisis and a physical health crisis in the NHS right now. And I don't mean the pandemic. I mean, the 750,000 cancer screenings. I'm talking about the backlogs, the record backlogs, the services. So with all of that, rather than increasing capacity and building up a healthcare system, they're talking about removing 100,000 workers, 10 or 20% of their entire workforce from frontline activities because they won't take a vaccine, right? So there are already steps to remove those professional medics from that system because they won't take a vaccine. And that's only 4 months away. That's not some dystopian view of the future. That's a published policy, which I believe they voted in as part of the vaccine mandate session. So that's coming. Whether it will happen or not, politically it's coming.
Yeah, I wonder whether it will be pushed further back though, because I mean, it's obvious that these NHS staff who haven't taken it already, they're very unlikely to get it. I mean, some might get it, but the vast majority aren't going to get it. So you are going to have mass walkouts. Now, are they going to allow that to happen? I mean, maybe they are, because it's not that I think that they'll care about health, but it's more that I think that they might care about if it causes a kind of public disturbance because, hospital care becomes so poor because you've had so many walkouts. It will all be because of political repercussions. It won't be because of they actually care about people's health. But, I imagine it might get close to the date and they will kind of push it back. But yeah, yet to be seen, because some of these major deadlines, like for instance in the I think it was Austria, they were supposed to have a lockdown of the unvaccinated, and I think it lasted about 2 days before they widened it to a general lockdown. In Germany, they're saying that they're gonna start making it a crime and things like this in the future. But I do feel like when we've hit these very major benchmarks, benchmark, is that the right word? That sounds too positive. These major
milestones.
Yeah. Like then they kind of have been pushed back if they're a bit too draconian, and then they just try them again in 6 months or whatever, or a few months.
It's mission creep. It's also coercion. I mean, all of the threats they think that all of the threats are targeted in the short term to at least either get you to take a vaccine and a booster or to get you to use the app. It's coercion, right? And, every time they threaten someone, the uptake will tick up and they'll get more of what they want. And then the question is, will they cross the line? And I think that's probably a big telling on the NHS, because there are heroes. They're the heroes. They're the ones that work through the pandemic. They're also medical professionals, in the majority, and people who have a good insight in terms of their own risk-benefit profile of a particular medicine, and they may be choosing not to take it for good medical reasons. So it really flies in the face of some of the orthodoxy around this. And but it's being approved in this parliament of ours. So in theory, it could happen. I mean, there's also the point of I believe that the NHS is being diminished. I think it's being diminished. I think it's been deliberately diminished. We've seen billions invested in surveillance, in track and trace, in all of these other, in vaccines, in all of these other initiatives. But we've had 2 years to plan for this winter, for maybe a crisis, Omicron or whatever you want to believe. We've had 2 years to prepare for this crisis. The only thing that's happened is capacity has been reduced. So they've invested nothing in the NHS. It looks like it's being diminished. It looks like it's being deliberately diminished. And if it gets to the point where the public are angry at the NHS, again, that's another very, very divisive policy. People, when they see the NHS not function, they're going to get angry with it. People are going to be harmed. The public will turn against the NHS, which actually opens the door to doing other things like to the NHS, like privatizing it and really starting to take it apart. So there's some really sneaky, nasty things in here happening. And I guess that's what worries me.
Yeah, I have the same. Actually, I'm not sure I do have the same feeling. I kind of feel that all of this stuff that's happening with the NHS has been kind of hailed as this. It's almost become like a cult, and it's like you're all supposed to worship it, and it's got its own symbol. Now you've got the rainbow, and everyone's putting this thing, up in their window, and it's all clapping for the NHS, etc. There's kind of like a religion built around it, and to be honest, I'm okay with the religion of the NHS if what it takes for the religion of the NHS to kind of die a death is for all of these NHS workers to walk out, etc. And then they say, oh, look, the NHS is, we can't call them all heroes anymore because they're all doing walkouts, etc. And then the public turns against it. I'm not sure that would necessarily be such a bad thing.
No.
The reason being that I actually think that, the NHS is an institution that should be looking after people's health, but it's already been massively politicized, right? So it's almost like anything that the government wants you to kind of like or feel positively towards, they just stick the NHS thing on it, right? So we're calling it NHS Test and Trace. It's got nothing to do with the NHS. The company who made that is called Serco, and they're a private contracting company, and they're a pretty, a classic kind of evil parasitic company that just has government deals, like backhand deals, and makes billions and makes people who are friends and family of politicians very rich. That's what they do, but they put the NHS sticker on it, right?
Yep, same with the COVID app. Isn't it the NHS COVID app? I don't know, something like that. Yeah,
I'm not sure. Test and Trace COVID. I'm not sure what the difference is because I've never downloaded either, to be honest. But,
no, I haven't, to be honest.
But, they've also got, you see these billboards and stuff in London, and they've got look into his eyes, this, that, and another, all of this crazy, propaganda. But again, what have you got on there? The NHS. And it's kind of like the government just thinks, well, we can just, if we put the NHS on something, everyone's just going to love it and kind of lap it up. And I think that it's about time that people this religion of the NHS died. And maybe this is a step in that direction because they're at a crossroads now. It's like, are they heroes or are they evil anti-vaxxers?
They're health workers. They're not heroes. They are health workers. They are professional healthcare workers, and that's it. It's a job.
Sure, exactly. I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. That's how I perceive it. But you have got a lot of people who do worship all NHS workers.
Politically, they do, yeah. And I think media and social media is also part of, the whole propaganda. I mean, different countries they seem to be pushing the same agenda, but different countries using different tools, right? Some are more authoritarians. Some in the US, it's spread very much along political lines. In the UK, the tool to push this agenda is always the NHS, right? We are here. We exist to protect the NHS. The whole narrative is around the NHS. That's a very UK-centric thing. Other places do talk about the health systems, but not as much as we do. And you're right. It's politicized. It is like a religious token. We all worship before it, even though we pay a fortune for it. The thing about changing the NHS is fine, and I think it would benefit from change. The trouble is what comes next. And if you've had any experience at all of something like the US health model, that is awful. That is an absolute disaster, right? It's the way health is delivered, who gets it, how much you pay for it, the way it's run by the insurance companies and the price you pay. It's an awful, awful, awful system. So whichever way you look at the NHS, it's never going to be as bad as the US, right? And the question would be, if something does happen to the NHS, what comes next? And the worry would be there's enough, like you say, capitalist predators around, the Sercos of this world and everyone else. They did try to break it up and turn it into some money-making machine, buy it at a fire sale price. I could see, you got our health secretary at the moment is an ex-merchant banker, right? Sajid Javid, he's an ex-merchant banker. His job would be very familiar with breaking up companies. You drive them into the dirt, you sell them at a fire sale, and all your cronies and everyone else makes a fortune out of it. That would be my worry for the NHS. Not that it doesn't need to change, but what does it turn into?
I struggle a lot with the kind of healthcare question because as a libertarian, I'm essentially opposed to forcing people to pay for other people's healthcare. Like, I believe that essentially everyone should be paying for their own healthcare. Nobody should be forced to provide healthcare, and nobody should be forced to pay for other people's healthcare. Like, it's an individual responsibility. But I also appreciate what you say, that it does seem that in America they've got a pretty bad health system. And to be honest, I'm not sure how much of that is just to do with the fact that Americans have generally pretty poor health, much poorer health than Europeans. So you kind of, if you were to put their health on a parity with Europeans, maybe they would have a better system. I can't say that with any kind of certainty. No. But certainly, I'd agree. Like, it couldn't get worse. This is, a kind of...
And it isn't just...
Sorry, go ahead.
And when I say it gets worse, it's not just a political thing or a financial thing. We're actually talking about people here, that when services are removed, they get harmed. They get harmed, and vulnerable people die. This is genuinely going to affect people, families. It's going to affect the vulnerable, and it's going to affect the sick. When care's not there, people get harmed. This isn't just a political football, but we have politicians and institutionalized people in the NHS who seem to be prepared to take that risk, right? They're so wedded to their, whatever this political ambition is, they're prepared to stand aside and see people harmed. And that, to me, is very, very telling. There's something very, very sinister about that. Going back to why you would take out, and I should probably confess at this time, I do live with an NHS nurse as well, so I've got to be very careful about what I say here.
Fair enough. While we're on the healthcare...
Even worse, it's an unvaccinated one as well, so it's pretty close to my chest, that one.
Okay, well, that's interesting. Let's talk about that then. So is she going to be one of the NHS 70,000 or whatever that leaves in April?
Yeah, I don't think it's... I think, just vox populi and listen to people, I think the numbers are probably a lot higher than that. A lot higher.
Oh, a lot higher, right, okay. Yeah, to be honest, I'm using the government figures, and as we know, they lie about all of this stuff, so yeah, presumably will be higher.
Yeah, so that's something that she'll be facing, absolutely, along with many of her colleagues. But we'll see how that plays out.
Okay, so have you had many conversations with her about that? I'm interested just to know what you know, because I don't have... I know people who work in the NHS, but I don't expect any of them will be walking out. So I'm interested to know, obviously it's kind of a second-hand account, but like, what's her experience of what people are saying within the NHS and amongst her kind of peers, and her own views on that policy?
Yeah, I mean, we're sort of straying into sort of personal territory here, but I think there's a lot of people are very uncomfortable with the NHS who work there. Certainly in the last 12 months, the direction it's gone in. It seems to be crossing some fundamental lines about care and what it means by care. Even to the point where a third, there's this current obsession with boosters and third vaccines where this is being prioritized, GP surgeries within the healthcare service generally over just standard treatments, care for checkups on the elderly and various other treatments. So that is rubbing some people up the wrong way, a lot of people. But there's also, it's a very, very difficult institution to work in if there's a particular policy. It's not known for, whistleblowers are punished quite severely. It's very, very difficult to swim against the tide in the NHS, even though many people, many more than you'd expect, are uncomfortable. And you see this on an individual level because, you can make complaints about the health service, but the individuals who work in it generally are quite fantastic. They tend to work against the system rather than with it. And there's probably far more people in there that are unhappy than are being, it's not just people are vaccinated or not. There's a level of dissatisfaction, I think, with a lot of people in the NHS at the moment. But I don't feel that comfortable talking about this because this is a private conversation between me and my partner. And, I'm not working there day to day. But I think that the figures and the numbers are higher.
Okay, yeah, let's move on. I didn't mean to pry. I'm just
no, that's absolutely fine. It's a fact of my life. I've tweeted about it a few times. So
I know that this is another thing that we aren't going to go too much into, but I know that you do have some experience in the pharmaceutical industry. So, Can you give us a window into what is going on there? Because it's how do you have so much power in the hands of seemingly this small group of pharmaceutical companies out? Maybe they're not small companies themselves, but certainly a small group who seem to have this huge amount of power over kind of governments. And it's almost like every major government in the world is owned by Pfizer right now. How do we get here?
Yeah, it's not just the pharmaceutical industry. It seems to be Pfizer in particular. And I wish I had an answer. I mean, people often talk about the pharma industry being evil. My experience of working in it, it's not. It's just full of normal people trying to do normal things, and a lot about bringing medicines to market that make people feel better. There's that side of it, but it seems to have just. And there's always been a dark side of that as well, which is mis-selling of drugs or expensive treatments that people don't need, dodgy contracts with various organisations. So there's a dark side, absolutely, but it has just gone off the rails. I mean, it's supposed to be a regulated industry. So you have people like the FDA and the MHRA and the European Medicines Agency, in this constant battle between what you can do with medicines and drugs and what you can't, and, running very, very detailed studies. And if they don't like your drug, they'll pull it to market. So there's a bit of kind of cut and thrust. I think they've been relatively toothless in the past, these regulators. But right now they've gone completely absent, utterly, completely absent. And now we have governments, even celebrities acting as pharma salesmen. I mean, this isn't a magical cure. It's a product. It's a commercial product. It could be an iPhone or a tin of beans. So that doesn't matter. It's just a commercial product. It's a sales opportunity. And we now have these sold everywhere around the world, and Pfizer in particular. I mean, you have government ministers coming on and saying, get your booster, get your booster, get your booster for Christmas. It's just a pharma product. And all of the protocols, all of the rules, all of the regulations have all been broken. It's a new paradigm. And there are many, many people just scratching their heads who've worked for decades in the pharma industry and not quite sure how or why this has been allowed to happen.
Yeah, so what you just said there reminded me, I don't know if you've seen this, there's a kind of interview and it's almost like a kind of behind the scenes type footage, and it's with Sajid Javid, and he's talking to this reporter.
Oh, not the Sky one. He drags him off to the hospital and says, come and get injected with me now.
Yes.
Jesus.
That's it. I mean, like, there wasn't too much talk about this at the time, but when I watched that, I was like, that is one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. Like, it was just such a clear moment for me that highlighted this fact that we don't have a government. We basically have a bunch of big pharma salespeople.
They are.
I've never seen this man kind of push for anything as much as he was pushing for that single guy, the cameraman, to go and get his booster. He was like, he would have dragged him kicking and screaming.
He looks unhinged.
Yes, doesn't he?
He looks unhinged. He's like some like coked up insurance salesman just trying to, he just like off his face saying, you've got to do this. You've got to. And every statement comes on, no matter what the question is, the answer is take a vaccine, get a booster, take a vaccine, get a booster.
Yeah.
And they just are acting as pharma sales reps, right? It's just, that's all it is. And at a medical level, I'm not an expert on the medical side. There's enough brilliant people around who are challenging this, but, you've got this strange, absolutely incredible situation where you've taken essentially a vaccine twice, it doesn't work. And the solution is you must take a third one. And you're living with this kind of double think at the same time, this paradox of, you told me the first one was enough. Then you told me I had to take a second one. Now you're telling me they don't work and I need to take a third one. And they're still trying to push it. It's almost like sanity is just, it's insane. And I can't see from a medical benefit or a regulatory perspective how this is happening. And then you break it down to, you see like that interview that you're talking about, where he just looks like a crazy man trying to drag a cameraman or an interviewee off the street. And it's just, it makes no sense. It really makes no sense at all.
Yeah, it reminded me of this Louis Theroux documentary that I watched about Scientology.
Yeah, it's a cult.
Yeah, it's a cult. Exactly. And when he's kind of speaking to these people, it's like they just look, really like deep into your eyes. And it's like, they have this, they're just hell-bent on this mission to kind of recruit you or intimidate you or whatever it is. Yeah. And I was looking at, Sajid Javid, and I'm like, this guy looks like he's been possessed. It's almost like they've all been hypnotized. They've all been taken into a Pfizer back room and they've been hypnotized for their one goal in life, to just sell these jabs.
I think that's a really good analogy, because the other side of that, and what we're starting to see now, is, what happens if you leave the Church of Scientology, right? If if you're the heretic there, you are hated. They never let you go. You're hated beyond hate. You're never allowed to see your family again. You are the devil incarnate if you leave that church. And it's a bit like what we're seeing now, because the people who, for their own reasons, choose not to get a vaccine. I mean, if you're young and healthy, whatever, or you just don't, you're waiting for some clinical data or the trials to complete, whatever, you choose not to get one. You're now being positioned as the heretic. You're the heretic. You are. It's not that you don't want a pharmaceutical product. You're a heretic. You're going to be getting burned at the stake pretty soon because you're a non-believer. And we're moving into this cultish religious sphere, where the psychologists like to be, which is, if you don't believe in this, you're evil. Again, I cannot make sense of that. And then you look at people like Javid and the way he is so obsessed with it. Looks like a crazy person. Yeah,
and something seems to have changed even since he's kind of taken that position. Like before, I don't know, it's like this possession seems to have taken place in front of our very eyes. It's very, very strange.
Yeah.
But, some people just haven't been affected, because I do see this thing as a cult. It's kind of like a cult that's gone mainstream and taken over. It's like one of the biggest cults that I can't imagine one that's gone bigger. I guess you could call some other things like, cults, that we do. I mean, you could say like religion, things like this. Some people would make that argument, but certainly like something that's come around as fast as this. It's like 2 years in and people, are kind of taking the vaccine like it's the kind of messiah, like a messianic mission, it's kind of the thing which is granting you salvation.
It's like, it's your civic duty. It's like, it's like you're preparing for war or something, it's your civic duty to keep the country moving forward.
This section of the conversation has been censored in order to meet the community guidelines. For the full uncensored version of this conversation, please check the description for links to censorship-free platforms.
But if you're a non-believer, you're about to become, marginalized. You see, there's horrible things being said in the media now by, key influencers about how people who don't want this, they're selfish, they're nasty, they should be segregated and isolated in society. They can't be allowed to mix with the good people. They're evil, they're selfish. These things are being said now. It's amazing to hear that in a society in the 21st century.
Completely. We are talking about segregation, and you say that word segregation and people get triggered as if like, oh, well, you can't use that for this. It's like,
well, you can, because you are.
That's what the word is used for. Like the word segregation means segregating society. Literally, I mean, that's what it is. Yeah. And people will be like, oh yeah, but this is based upon a vaccine. It's not based upon whatever, like race or something. It's like, well, that's not the word segregation doesn't depend upon race.
The parameter doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, whether it's gender, whether it's race, whether it's ethnicity, whether it's your religion, whether it's what you believe in or some other factor, it's still segregation, right? And you're still dividing society.
Yeah, and I have people who have said to me like, oh, well, you can choose to take the vaccine and it's a choice not to take it, therefore it's not segregation, like something like race, for instance. But, you choose religion as well, right? And you can have religious-based segregation.
That's the weakest argument you could possibly imagine. You're either going to discriminate and hate on some groups or you're not. You don't get to choose who you're going to discriminate against, right? You're either for discrimination or you're not. Choosing a group still means you're pretty nasty and pretty discriminatory and pretty vile in my eyes. And the idea that you can pick and choose doesn't wash. You're either everybody's equal, everybody's entitled to the same rights. We live in a society as one with the same inalienable rights, or we're not. You don't get to pick and choose.
Yeah.
And we're hearing it. We're hearing people, media influencers. If they were saying this 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, you just wouldn't think you could even hear that. It's hate. It's hate. This is genuinely hate speech because it's inciting people to hate a particular group. That's the irony, that all these people are so triggered about hate speech. This is genuine hate speech, and apparently it's acceptable now.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're a fascist for not putting your gender pronouns in your bio, but if you tell someone that they should have all of their rights stripped of them and they can't go to buy food because they've not taken a vaccine, then that's okay. That's just well, you have a choice.
But that's because of that nasty, selfish person who didn't want to take that product. In fact, they deserve it. They deserve it. They're unclean. They deserve it. And the parallels in history, you see a lot of this on social media, and it's a trigger point where the parallels about some of the worst atrocities in the world, whether it's Mao's China, Stalin's Russia, or Hitler's Europe, always starts with this othering process, this marginalizing of certain groups of people. And you can't just leap there because people start piling in about can't make those comparisons. But some of these comparisons are starting to become valid. That's the really sinister and chilling bit. When you're allowed in the public domain, politicians, celebrities, influencers, scientists coming out and saying it's okay to segregate these people, that's a checkpoint, right? That's a real, hang on, time out here, guys. What are we really trying to do?
Definitely. I do feel like there's a community that's really come together out of this, that have a set of shared fundamental values, which is actually quite rare to see in society, right? Like, we have shared values of, even when it comes to people who have had the vaccine, nobody who's kind of in the unvaccinated, kind of evil, selfish, whatever camp, according to some small group of people, we're not saying, people who are vaccinated you're not allowed to come to this, you should be like, if you're having your own events and we get to have unvaccinated, nobody's saying that. We're just saying, just treat everyone equal, just treat everyone equally, and just grant everybody the same freedom.
These are also my family and my friends. You make the choices. I'm not going to discriminate. I don't think I've ever discriminated against anyone or groups of people in my life. I'm not going to start now. That's a fundamental conflict for me. That's one of the most sinister things about that. And I don't know why you'd want to do that. I don't know why people would want to do that. That's what it feels sinister to me. Why would you want to discriminate against a group of people? And I think the optimism for me is it's like a core piece of our humanity. It's humanity to be there for people, to be with friends, and agree to disagree. It's a very, very important part of life, and I've never experienced it really growing up. I've seen it, but I've never really experienced it to a really bad extent where I've lived in a society where people are genuinely discriminated against, really genuinely, not just, sort of bad language, but genuinely discriminated against. I know, probably growing up, sort of evidence of it, but it's been such a lovely trajectory that it's largely gone away. I think most people can live a life now as they want, irrespective of creed, religion, sex, gender. You can pretty much do whatever you want. And I don't think we really are become, in the 30 or 40 years I've been aware, much more tolerant. And that's been a lovely journey. That's been a fantastic journey.
Do you think that those values are kind of a given? Because I'm not so sure anymore. I mean, when I went to this this kind of bar and they were, accepting or rejecting people based upon whether they could prove their vaccination status. And if you were, and people say, oh, well, they're allowed to do the test to prove, it doesn't matter if you're unvaccinated because you can show a test. Well, if only one group of people has to show a test, that's still discrimination, right? So
it is.
And a lot of people just went along with it. A lot of people are going along with it. And we've seen this in other countries that they have. So do you think that we actually have a sustainable enough, kind of solid enough philosophy as a nation, or more widely speaking, kind of as a planet, to kind of see this thing off and to kind of say no to all of this madness? Because it seems to me like my interpretation now is that there's actually only a minority of people who are willing to defend these values.
I think at the moment that's true. And I think, I think it is alarming and surprising when you see how many people are just happy to go along with this. I think that's because we're at the start of this development of this new type of society, potentially a tier one. The risk is that the further we get into it, the harder it is to unwind. I mean, that's the point. You just take one link out of the chain every time until when people do finally wake up, they're too invested or too controlled to back out of it. So it's finding that point where do enough people wake up before we get to that point? Or if we do get to that point, how do we back out of it? Because a lot of the people, I mean, I'm thinking about people maybe in their 20s now, late teens, 20s, growing up with the phone, probably don't care about this, don't see the risk. When I was 20 years old, I didn't care about much. I just cared about what I was going to be doing at the weekend and probably the weekend after that, and a bit of sport and something else. I didn't really care about philosophical questions about rights. I got angry about certain things, went to some marches for sure, but I didn't see risk or anything. I just didn't. So I don't know. I think some older people are more clued in because they've got some historic concept. I think if I was 20 now, I probably wouldn't care. I probably just want to make sure I go to the club on Saturday.
Right. And this is because sometimes you will talk to people and they'll say something like, oh, well, your right to bodily autonomy doesn't trump my right to not catch a virus, or something like this, like something really like strange and bizarre.
That's not even their words. That is some of these brilliant phrases that have been created. It's like an I believe in civil rights, but now I'm an anti-vaxxer. These words, these sentences, these constructs have been calculated and they've been manufactured, right? Nothing goes over your right to bodily autonomy. Absolutely zero. Your right to decide what goes into your body, what procedures or medicines you take or is done to you is yours. It's the whole basis, informed medical consent, it's the whole basis of a health service, right? You have absolute bodily autonomy. And do you know why? People don't like, because doctors are corrupt. Doctors are corrupt. They have conflicts of interest. They do bad things. They make money at your expense. They give you treatments you don't need and expensive drugs you don't want. Right? They are corrupt. And the fundamental right you have to address that corruption is your right to bodily autonomy. You can turn down whatever you need. And that is in your interest, and irrespective of what society wants. That's you looking after your own body. Nothing trumps that. It's essential and it's a fundamental human right. You have phrases that are developed that people have manufactured those phrases because they know that when the likes of you or I say this, that's what's get parroted back. They've got the response already written.
Where we are as a society now, I think there is a lot of kind of collectivist thinking, which has now been cultivated or kind of weaponized for this cause, because there's so many people there who just think, oh, well, everything I do is for the service of the greater good, is for the service of someone else. I've got to do this, protect, that person or whatever it is. And now it's just kind of taken to this extreme level where it's like even the germs which might leave my body, like I'm now responsible even for them. I'm responsible for something that's literally invisible. So even if I never touch someone, I'm responsible if they get a virus, etc.
Yeah.
Which, I just think is a kind of extension of a kind of toxic collectivist ideology, which has taken hold. And what we actually need now is to have a return, like hopefully a healthy and hopefully a kind of peaceful return to a recognition of individual rights, which seems to be kind of like a dirty word now. It's like, well, if you care about individual rights, you're some kind of, right-wing fascist. It's like, well, no, it's literally the opposite. Like you believe in the fundamental rights of the individual and that they shouldn't be tyrannized by the group.
The whole 20th century was a battle for civil rights, whether it was women's rights with, in the 1920s and 1910s, it was rights based on gender, then became rights based on poverty. So then, poor people could vote, and then it was a whole series of rights, who you could sleep with. I mean, it was illegal being gay in the 60s and 70s, and even unacceptable as late as the 80s. So it was all about getting rights. These were hard-won rights, and it has made our society better. And now we're at a point where how can you call those rights, they're not worthy, they're the wrong thing? I don't have the words to articulate well enough, but I really struggle with the idea that these hard-won rights, and you look at the race history throughout the 20th century, Martin Luther King and the battles of the civil rights they had and addressing the Jim Crow laws, all of that was about a battle for rights. Why do we suddenly hand them back and say they're not important? Because without our rights, we're nothing. Without your rights, you've got the same. You may as well be cattle. You've got nothing. You've got nothing to support you. Nothing to stop anyone, corporation or a government doing anything to you without your basic individual rights. So getting a bit of a soapbox about that one, but I really struggle with it. I really do. I can't understand how people would say having rights is selfish. It's nuts.
You brought up the race thing, and it's an interesting point because a lot of people will say, oh, well, collectivism is always right, and you should just kind of like submit to whatever the collective good is. But you could literally argue anything on the basis of like it's better for the collective good, right? Like some of the worst horrors in history have been argued on that basis. Like when
always for the collective good, for your safety. Yeah.
Right. Like when for instance, like they were trying to end slavery, some of the people who were pro-slavery, their argument was we need to continue slavery because otherwise cotton's going to be too expensive if we have to actually pay people to create it. So we need to maintain slavery so people can have cheaper clothes and that the industry doesn't collapse, right? They were literally arguing that slavery, that you should discard the rights of slaves because the greater good was that people can, that you have an industry, you have people in jobs, that you can afford cheaper clothes, etc. But like, obviously, individual rights trump everything, like because the collective rights stem from the individual rights.
And it's funny how those collective rights always seem to be parroted by the rich and powerful, right? It's always the rich and powerful who talk about the collective rights, the rights of the community, because they have a very high status in it. What they don't like is people with individuals. Individuals with inalienable rights are a challenge to them, right? Because they can't be bullied. They can't be sacked. They're able to negotiate a fair living wage. They're able to decide what goes in their body. They're able to decide who they want to sleep with. They're able to decide lots of things themselves. They are a threat to people who want this kind of top-down, totalitarian, collectivist. It's for the common good. The common good doesn't exist in many cases. It's just a tool, and it's used a lot. I mean, it's been used a lot in the last 2 years. I've changed that. In the last 2 years, we've really seen this idea that this collective idea that it's our civic duty to take products to make everybody feel safe is more important. And it's a lie. It's a well-constructed lie.
Well, it's worked its way into so many things. I mean, at the beginning of this, it was like, initially they were telling you to wear a mask for your own good. Then when they realized that wasn't going to work, they were like, oh no, we'll tell people that you wear the mask to protect others. And then it was like, okay, now you've got to stay at home to protect the NHS. It wasn't stay at home to protect you, it's stay at home to protect the NHS. Then it was take the vaccine. Oh, it's not for you. You take the vaccine to protect others. Yeah. Whatever the nonsense reason is, it always tends to be that you're doing it for others, because what that does, it's a very, very deliberate tactic, and it's very obvious for most people, well, not most people to see, but in our community, I think most people see it, is that what it does is it kind of like causes other people to turn on each other. So it's like, well, you're not doing it to protect others. So now the others, which is like everyone, like you're the target because you're the selfish one.
That's exactly what it is. Absolutely spot on. And if you look, politicians haven't created these campaigns and this thinking. Very, very closely aligned with the politicians. We've got this group called SAGE. We've got the SPIB, whatever they're called, the Nudge Unit. These are all psychologists. That's they keep on coming on TV and saying, I'm a scientist, but they're psychologists. And if you look at the psychological campaign behind this, so what you're talking about, that do it for someone else, is about shaming and guilt, right? They're trying to make you feel ashamed for not wearing a mask, which is just really a visual representation that there's something going on. And they're relying on other people in society to make you feel ashamed, right? Because you're not part of the collective, you're not doing the right thing, or they're making you feel guilty for not taking a vaccine. This is shame and guilt. This is a psychological campaign. It's a political campaign based on psychology, and the psychology, I have to admit, is pretty brilliant. You almost want to tip your hat at them and say, this is so damn smart. It really is, to not only come up with the strategy, but then to kind of, I think if you just told people bluntly, you must do this without all this psychological conditioning, they'd resist. But they just break you down. Brilliant psychological. The campaign, save your gran, put a mask on, or your uncle's going to die and your kids are going to, like I say, it's horrific, but brilliant. And it's all based on basic psychological principles, very standard ones. The two I refer to, sometimes jokingly, you've got the Milgram experiment, which is where the guy in the white coats tell you to, give someone an electric shock and see what goes along with it, right? Okay, and people go along with that. That's basically your science. That's your witty and stuff. I'm a scientist, do as I say, because I come with authority. And you've got the Asch conformity experiment, where you've got, 5 people in a room. Only one of them is a subject. He doesn't realize this. And they'll come in and they'll tell you that, black is white and green is blue, whatever. And because the other 4 people say it, he does it or she does it. It's because they just want to participate in the group. They want to adhere to social norms, right? He doesn't want to be guilty or look stupid or not participate. And they've just extended these little psychological experiments onto populations of millions, and it's working. It really is working, and they've got this planned out right from now. You've got the guilt, you've got the shame, you've got the reward system. So if you're good, you get Christmas. That's another psychological trick. If good behavior now, compliant now, we'll give you Christmas back. Never mind that, 27th, I'm going to lock you down again. But that's another one. That's the reward mechanism for you. Like I say, very, very clever, but quite horrific. I don't know how these people sleep at night.
I'm glad you brought up that experiment, actually, because I've been trying to figure out, basically from the beginning of this thing, when everyone seemed to just kind of go headlong into this cult, and the rest of us were kind of just left on the sidelines being like, what the hell's just happened? And I've been trying to figure out what it actually is that has enabled some people to just kind of not fall for it, or what is the characteristic by which some people just seem to be kind of immune. The thing which, because you mentioned that experiment, and I've seen the same one. The one I saw actually was they have like lines, and it's like you say which is the shortest line or something, or which is the longest line.
Sorry, that's it. That's the actual one. Yeah, which lines are in parallel? That's it. Yeah, absolutely.
And you have these people, and generally speaking, if you bring in the test subject, they will go with what everyone else has said, even though it's clearly the wrong answer. And my theory is, if you took the people in the kind of freedom community who have seen through this, and you ran that experiment on them, they would be the anomaly to the experiment. That, and I have no evidence of that, but I think that if you were to run the experiment on the general population who have just kind of fallen for the whole COVID propaganda, and then you were to run the experiment on the people who haven't, I actually think you would get a marked difference in the rate of kind of compliance in that experiment.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think they probably recognize it. I don't know what that subset is, 10%, 20%, 30%. But if I, I'm sure if you sat in a room, I sat in a room and maybe people listen to, can you spot the two parallel lines? You'd go, they're those two. And if 9 other people said, no, they're not, you'd just turn around and go, A, you're silly, or B, am I the test subject here? Because this is just not making any sense. You'd work it out. You'd know, you would be able to articulate very clearly. And you're not going to bow, you're not going to bend to the authority. So there's something about sort of the moral fiber, moral courage, or just the ability to stand there and go, no, this is wrong. I think you're making a mistake. And I don't care how many people tell me it's a mistake. I'm going to stick to this because I can see that, because I can prove it rationally and scientifically or within my own mind that it's crazy. And I'm not going to accept just because everybody else, and it doesn't mean you're stubborn or anything like that. I don't know. But in this community that you're talking about, absolutely, you're probably up about, I think 80 or 90% would fail that test.
Yeah, that's a good word that you use just there, moral courage. I guess probably how I would term it is people who are not necessarily disagreeable, but kind of contrarians. That we're kind of willing to kind of just go against the grain. We're willing to have an opinion which contradicts the many, and that we don't actually care whether the many agree with that. There's a lot of people who I think they need to fit in with the group, or it's important to them, and therefore they're kind of willing to bend the truth or bend their interpretation of the truth if it means that they kind of stay in alignment with the majority. Whereas people like me, I'm assuming that you'd be the same, and a lot of people in this community would be the same, is that you have a kind of devotion to the truth, which which essentially trumps your kind of yearning to be part of a majority. Whether you even have that yearning whatsoever, I'm not sure that I have it, to be honest, whatsoever. I guess we probably all have it to a small degree, but for me, being in service of the truth is always the most important factor, not trying to kind of fit in or comply with the majority in some way.
And I like to look at things, rationally. I like evidence. I like data. I like to gauge opinions, and I'm not easily influenced by someone who just speaks from a television or wears a white coat. I like to think what's behind them and what's motivating them. And it's also interesting that, that we also, as society, I would always say has progressed, we value difference now. We value people. We celebrate people who are different culturally, have different ideas. So we've gone to this idea, be yourself. Don't necessarily conform. You can barely watch an advert about Apple, whatever, someone's different, and everyone's different. And we celebrate differences now, right? That's what we're supposed to do. At the same time, we drive conformity in a different way. So it's an illusion that we're celebrating this diversity, because what we really want is conformity. What these people want is absolute conformity. And they want you to just go along with it. There's so much psychological pressure now to go along with this. It's really, I worry about people's, the mental health of people who've grown up, and particularly children now, because I think there's so much pressure to conform, and you're not allowed to be different. You may be different in many other ways, but you're not allowed to be different on this particular point.
I think that there has been a change, though, in this kind of, I guess I'm not sure what the word is, the kind of zeitgeist when it comes to, being different, right? Because I've noticed in the advertising world, for instance, that it used to be that you would see commercials, just like you were saying, it'd be kind of think different, be the square in the, what is it, be the circle in the square hole or whatever it is. And, but now, more recently, everything's all about kind of we are one, we are together, we can do this together. And I've actually noticed that has changed quite significantly in the past kind of, maybe I'm not sure. Maybe it's been a long time, but I couldn't tell you now a brand, a kind of, commercial or whatever, which is priding itself on being unique and being different. Everything now is all be a part of the team type thing. When you watch kind of sports commercials, or you watch, even technology, everything's just we are one, we are together, we are connected. I don't know, it's just something I've noticed, and I wonder whether that kind of speaks to a wider trend in society.
You know, that's a really interesting point, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm probably talking about adverts maybe, I don't know, 6, 12, 18 months ago. The typical one where you'll see an Apple advert, someone's got green hair and doing something, and someone else has got one leg and they're doing something. Yeah, you're right. Maybe it has been a subtle change in that, and now maybe it is more around, be together, kung fu. I don't know enough about the ins of it, but I don't know where diverse this idea of having culturally diverse ideas and living your own one true life. But apparently, not if you don't want to buy into this, you're not allowed to do that. That is not the one true life you're allowed.
Yeah, actually, I just when you were talking there, I thought of one notable contradiction to my theory here, which is that recent kind of, I think it was a John Lewis advert, and there's the kid, I don't know whether it might have been pulled in the end, because people made a load of complaints, because it was like a kid who was dressed as a girl and he was going around like wrecking the house and stuff like that. Did you see that commercial?
I think I might have picked up on, I don't think I saw the commercial, but yeah, I think there was I'm trying to think what the controversy was around it.
I think the controversy was that it was basically kind of, it was almost like celebrating people just trashing things. It was just kind of like rampant, just like, I'll just go around and trash the whole house and I don't care because I've got this insurance. I think it was for like insurance or something. So it was almost like putting a bad message out there. But again, like, it's like you're allowed to celebrate individuality in these very, very narrow confines. So for instance, you're allowed to celebrate like LGBTQ and
trans people, like a kid wants to dress as a boy or a girl, or mix it up or be, whatever. You like to something. You're right. I like the phrase. It's within narrow confines, isn't it? You're allowed to have that debate in this particular swim lane, and if you don't agree with it, you're the fascist and you're the bad person. But when it comes to other things like we're talking about, your freedom to choose, your freedom to live your life, your freedom to your bodily autonomy, those values don't exist anymore, right? We're only allowed to discuss it in these narrow confines of, often it can be gender or race or trans rights or sexuality or something else. It's okay to talk about it there, but not in a broader sense across society, where we've got some potentially really big things happening, and civil rights are under big civil rights. Your right to work, your right to travel, your right to privacy. Nah, we'll just gloss over that bit. We'll gloss over that bit. Strange.
Totally. So let's just move on to something a little bit more positive, which is, what we can kind of all be doing. Because I always ask this question, what are the things we can individually be doing? Because, I'm very much on that kind of, very like libertarian, and some of my ideas and concepts are a bit of a leap for a lot of people. So, I like to hear different ideas from the various people I talk to on, what we can each be doing to try and build towards a world which, it is in alignment with these kind of values that we've been talking about here.
Yeah. And, I think at a personal level, I think, in terms of the situation we're in now, I think it is find a little bit of courage. Don't feel like you need to comply. If you feel it's right to resist, do so. And stand up, not just for yourself, but stand up for other people as well. Stand up for other people as well. Find allies if you can. Find people who think like you. Talk to people who think like you do. And it might not even be within your traditional sort of friends and family circle, but do find allies, because there's an awful lot of people that feel like this. They might not even be expressing it at the moment, but they certainly feel it. So whether it's through traditional media, social media, don't be afraid to talk about what you think. And that really is about kind of the love, support, and humanity. Just let it shine through. There's more people out there than you think. Organizing is difficult. It's very difficult to organize anything at the moment. There's no natural resistance here. There's I would see, real big leaders who are standing against it. So that will come, but I think that's difficult. And what I would personally like to see, for professionals out there, and I'm talking about the lawyers, the doctors, the nurses, the politicians, the people who are professional. They know they know this is wrong. They need to stand up, right? They need to put their hands up. They need to whether it's act as a whistleblower, confidential, they need to stand up, because we've got some real heroes out there in terms of, people like, the doctors Malone, McCulloch. McCulloch is on the Joe Rogan show, which is fascinating. There are some really brave people out there doing some really brave things. And I think either in that position, putting your hand up, somehow calling out what's really, really happening, that's going to help, because that's going to inspire other people to do that as well. So when you see wrong, you call it out, not necessarily publicly. It doesn't have to be in a situation where it's going to jeopardize anything to yourself, but just find a way to call it out. And I think that's the way we kind of push humanity forward. But it's going to become difficult. It's going to become more difficult, I think. But I think it will win through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it seems like we're kind of living in a world where just having kind of integrity and courage and kind of willing to walk a difficult path, but one that is the right path, and one which, is in service of truth and integrity and all of these things. That's just become quite a rare thing now.
Well, it hasn't been needed. I don't think it's been needed. If you look at, I was talking to someone recently whose grandfather was in the North Atlantic during World War II. He was a merchant seaman. I mean, he faced life and death every day, getting hunted by bloody submarines, and he saw death. He saw ships go down, and he did it for years. I mean, he faced life and death, and he did it because he believed in something, right? He believed he was keeping his family safe. And anyway, I heard all that. If you don't mind me swearing, at the end of it, he just said, "Look, I think I can handle stuff. I think I can handle not going into fucking Tesco's. If his granddad could handle that, I think I can handle a few dirty looks at fucking Tesco's. I think it's the simple things. We're not going to go to war. I don't think, not yet anyway. But just having a little bit of just being able to stand your ground a little bit, a good thing, and it'll make you feel better as well."
Yeah, totally. That I was talking to Sarah Plumley yesterday. I don't know if you know her. She was saying to me that very similar to what you were saying. Actually, she was just saying, like, it's such a small thing to, for instance, just say, okay, I'm not gonna put a mask on just for the sake of it, and kind of perpetuate this kind of fear campaign. It's actually a very, very easy thing to do. And as soon as you start doing those things, you can then move on to more difficult things, right? So it's, it starts with that. But, like this conversation I had on Friday, I didn't win over this guy who wasn't going to let me into this bar because I was unvaccinated. But I certainly gave him, a very, very I tried to speak to him just in the firmest and strongest terms possible to explain to him the kind of society that he was enabling and he was helping to create by his actions. And so it didn't kind of work. I wasn't let in. But the thing is, like, I probably was able to step up to the plate in that way because in the early days I made that simple decision to say I'm not going to wear the mask because it starts there. And then you can get more courage and more courage and more courage, and because we're going to need a lot of courage because there's more stuff coming down the line, right? So we're going to need people to have kind of walked that path. As long as every day you're becoming kind of more courageous, and
honestly, different. It's different. I mean, I don't know how you feel. My partner, she's like 5'0", right? So if she goes into shop on the tube or something and she doesn't wear a mask, people go up to her and tell her to put her on. Often men, right? So she's like a smaller, vulnerable woman. So she's like an easy target for them. So it's harder for her. They usually pick on the wrong person, to be fair. But it's harder for certain people to push back a little bit. So everybody's got their own lines. Whereas I haven't worn a mask for, I think, I don't know, probably 18 months or something. No one has ever said a word to me. Never. And so, it's harder for some people to show. It's not just black and white. Different people face different challenges. And, a lot of this does come down to bullying. We've given a lot of the bullies a lot of license right now to go out and inflict themselves onto people, and they're going to do that to people who are smaller. A lot of women are going to face it. A lot of older people are going to face it. But just if everyone could take a little small step, perfect. But I do recognise that not everybody faces the same challenges.
That's a really great point to start rounding up on. So do you mind just telling people where they can find you, and also just any final words that you have before we wrap up?
No, well, first of all, thank you very much. This is the first time I ever talked, so it's been nourishing as well as interesting. I'm on Twitter. It's Aldous Nous, ALDOUSNOUS. You won't find me because I have a search suggestion ban, a search ban. My account is permanently marked as offensive, which is a classic, and various other things. So I hope you do find me on Twitter, but it'll be quite a search. But I'm out there, and I'll hook up to anyone who believes the same as we do.
Yeah, well, there will be a link in the show notes as well to your Twitter, so people can find you there for sure.
Okay, cool.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, and we'll speak again soon.
You're fascinating, Johnny. Really enjoyed it.
Cheers.
All right, thank you very much. Cheers.